meeting is being recorded.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. I want to thank Jennifer and On Target Pediatric Therapy for joining us as a community partner and kicking this off, because it allows me the opportunity in Dyslexia RX to share this information with people all over the country. And with that being said, I would love to hear in the chat, if you can place in the chat where you are from, your state or town, and then what discipline you are, speech, OT, PT, if you're a parent here. While I go ahead and get things set up, I would love to hear and learn where you are from. I'll give you a minute to write that in the chat. And I'm going to be monitoring the chat as we go. Okay, let's see. Okay, if you're not quite sure, oh, we do have a lot in the chat here. Okay, so we have Atlanta, Georgia, Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's where I am right now. I'm in Tulsa. I navigate several different time zones. Sometimes I'm in California and sometimes I'm here. So thank you very much for your patience last night. We have parents here, OT, teachers, clinical psychologists. Thank you, Lori. Thank you so much for coming. We have kindergarten teacher, speech therapy, preschool teacher, lots of people from Atlanta, Florida, parents, lots of parents from Atlanta, speech therapy, New York, yay, Bronx. That's awesome, Amy. I am a native New Yorker. Let's see, who else do we have here? This is great. Okay. So what I am liking about this is not only do we have diversity from throughout the country, but we also have diversity in disciplines that are represented here. And the reason why that is so important is because this is pretty much the team that you'll be working with. You will have, parents and psychologists, teachers, educators, the child. There's a variety of people in your team, and to keep this in mind. So let's go ahead and get started. I always find it really interesting to see where everybody is. And so, as you know, today's presentation is about dyslexia and strategies and accommodations. I would love to hear in the chat what you learned about strategies and accommodations. For example, are they short-term? Are strategies a Band-Aid? Do they have a global effect, meaning they'll work the same on everyone? Or is dyslexia not real? What have you learned about the use of strategies and accommodations? As you go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'll give you time to put that in the chat, I just want to share a little bit about my background, how all this kind of happened, and how we got here, to give you a minute to write all that. So some of you know my background, and for those that don't, I am an occupational therapist. I've been an occupational therapist for over 30 years, and I never really knew what dyslexia was until my daughter was born. And around kindergarten, we started seeing difficulties with her, and it trended through about third grade when we finally were able to get her diagnosed and learn that she had dyslexia. And I still didn't understand what that was, but I really thought I could get treatment for it. And so when I realized there wasn't any treatment that provided permanent change, I started really looking into what I could do as an occupational therapist to support her with dyslexia. And that's how Dyslexia Center of Tulsa came about. And I am the founder of Dyslexia Center of Tulsa, and now it is in somebody else's loving hands to take the mission even further. And so I also did the Educate to Advocate podcast to get information out to a broader spectrum of people. And so then after all that happened and I transitioned kind of away from the clinic, I realized that there was this huge need that wasn't being addressed, and that is the mental health side of dyslexia and how dyslexia impacts the family. And so that was the inspiration behind Dyslexia RX, which is a virtual service to really support families dealing with dyslexia and just broaden that scope of support. And so that really speaks to why we are talking about strategies and accommodations today, because that is part of the support. So let's see in the chat what you're saying that you learned about strategies and accommodations. So Amy says they are allowing wait time, visual cues, manipulatives, and small group work. Yes, those are some good strategies and accommodations. Need different strategies for different people. Yes, Beverly, I would agree with that. Use strategies and accommodations can help everyone, right? Accommodations are necessary. Great, great. Providing the needed accommodations can make such a difference in the student's self-esteem and experience of success. Absolutely, Lori, I think that addressing self-esteem and self-concept is huge. And it's often something that we really aren't testing for from a standardized assessment. We don't really treat when we think about dyslexia. We think about addressing phonics and pre-reading skills and early reading emerging skills, but addressing that mental health is so important. And then one last one, Blimey says one-on-one intervention outside the classroom can teach necessary skills in the classroom. Strategies and accommodations can remind students to use their skills and limit the load. Great. So I can see all of you have experience with strategies and accommodations, and you're bringing to the table some experience with you. So I can't wait to learn more from you as we go on today. Alrighty, so why are we even using strategies and accommodations? Well, as you know, dyslexia is a language processing disorder, and there are specific areas that are in the brain that either were underdeveloped or not developed. And that was identified by Dr. Sally Shaywitz from Yale Center of Creativity and Dyslexia. The two main areas are Broca's motor and Wernicke's area. And you can see Broca's motor is really responsible for being able to articulate sound when we're speaking, understand words, express maybe how we're feeling or expressive language, and phonological processing skills. And so with that being said, if this is underdeveloped or not developed, having really impactful strategies or accommodations can support the individual in the meantime, while speech therapy might be working with them to increase and make these skills stronger. Wernicke's area is another area of the brain that supports language and supports the areas of dyslexia, and that includes word analysis, response to spoken words, and phonetic sequencing. And again, if these areas are not fully developed, you can see why our children or the clients that we're working with or our students really need support. I do want to also let you know, if you have any questions along the way, please go ahead and use the Q&A, and I will go ahead and keep an eye on that and answer any questions. Okay. I always love to spend time here because I think sometimes, and maybe not all the time, but sometimes when we have a child that, or an individual, right? Because children with dyslexia grow up to be adults with dyslexia. So we have an individual come to us with difficulties with reading and we feel they might have dyslexia. We may just automatically default to what is tried and true, what we've heard that have been successful for other people, or maybe what we're seeing on social media or what we're learning in professional development. And we take this one thing that we've learned, let's say increased time for taking a test, we'll use that one as an example, and we use it for every single person that we're working with who may have that specific learning disability. And then what you may see out of that is you start, it gets puzzling because it may work really well for one child and not work at all for another. And you're just kind of scratching your head wondering, why is this not working? It worked on Susie. Why is it not working on Kevin? Well, it's because all of us, our brains have developed differently. And because of that, how we present with our deficits will be different for everyone. And so since it's different for everyone, those accommodations or those strategies that we need to have, they will also be different. So how do you know? How do you know when to use one thing versus another? I really believe in the power of observation. And so I'm going to walk you through a scenario I'm going to walk you through a scenario in which you can really use your observation skills to identify if you need to use one strategy or accommodation, or if you need to maybe push toward remedial reading, or maybe even bring in occupational or speech therapy into the mix. So let's walk down the scenario for a moment. So let's say we have two children. Let's say we have Joey and Tom. Okay, they both present the same, at least at first blush. And what I mean by the same is they're both really struggling with their academics. Their grades are not as good as they could be. You see potential, but it's just not there, and we're not quite sure why. So let's take Joey, for example. We'll say Joey is the first child up here, and we know his neurodevelopment is fine. So on the last slide, when we took a look at Broca's motor and Wernicke's area and all those components that may have been underdeveloped, for Joey, they are not underdeveloped and they're fine. How do we know? Did we take an MRI? No, we did not. We did not run through a functional MRI. However, we know because everything that he's working on is kind of at the same level. He's struggling across the board. Everything's equal. He's just not accessing it. This could be a child who maybe is in the part of a military family, and they are moving a lot, so they might be missing curriculum. Perhaps it's a child that's living in a food desert, or maybe they don't have access to get to school regularly, or they can't get to school regularly, and they have a lot of absences. Or maybe their parents are either working multiple jobs, or the family is very active and there's no opportunity after school to spend that extra time you need. Or maybe English is a second language, but whatever the scenario is, they're just not tapping into it because there's no opportunity, or there's not enough opportunity of what they might need. With that said, you'll want to go ahead and maybe send Joey over to remediation. So all the reading support programs that are currently in our public school systems are perfect for Joey. He will go through that, he will be successful, and he will never look back. Things will be great for him. And so will you need accommodations and strategies? Most likely, but they'll be very short term, because once he learns the skills, he'll be able just to move on with the skills. So that's one way of knowing these will be short term. Take a look at Tom, for example. He's a little different. Again, he's presenting the same in terms of lower grades, not really doing as well as you feel potentially he may be able to do, but there's some inconsistency here. And what I mean by that is typically you'll hear the parent say some scenario like this. Tom, he just really struggles with sounding out words, and when he reads, it's very robotic. Or maybe Tom reads great, but he can't remember what he reads. Or Tom can sound out big words, but small words he struggles with, and I just don't know why. But you hear some glitch. And the other thing you'll hear is how great he's doing in everything else. He loves sports, he's very social, he is doing great in science, great in math. But regardless of what the great thing is, there's this discrepancy between this is how he's functioning and everything else, but reading is down here. And it's that gap. That's an inclination that maybe strategies and accommodations alone isn't enough to support Tom, and making that referral to psychology, occupational therapy, speech therapy to identify those executive cognitive functions to give him that added support would be really helpful. So using those observation skills to identify if strategies will be helpful on a temporary basis or strategies would be permanent plus therapy would be really helpful in making sure they're getting all the best support that they need. Before we go on to the next slide, I do want to take a few Q&As that I see here. So Sarah, could you explain how to get a dyslexia evaluation? Is this typically covered by insurance, specifically Medicaid, Amerigroup, Peach State, etc.? I have several clients who would like to get an evaluation, but I don't know where to start. This is a great question. So Sarah, to answer that question, a dyslexia evaluation, and I believe Lori is on board here. She's a clinical psychologist, and Lori, feel free to put something in the chat to add to this. But I really recommend going to a clinical psychologist or a neuropsychologist, somebody who has the credentials to diagnose. So we have a lot of providers out there, and I am one of them as well, who can do screeners and in-depth assessments and evaluations, and we can identify the executive cognitive functions or areas that they're having difficulty with, but it stops short of diagnosing. So is a diagnosis something you need? That kind of leads into that question as well. A diagnosis is great if you're looking for accommodations and support at school. A diagnosis is really important around your senior year in high school. If you are going on to higher education and you want accommodations in college, you will need that, or to take an SAT or an MCAT or anything like that. You'll want to make sure you have a current evaluation and diagnosis at that point. Diagnosis will not change how your child receives treatment or what type of treatment they receive if you get occupational or speech therapy, because what they will do is they will treat the deficits. So whether that's a diagnosis of a language disorder, if it is lack of typical childhood development, the diagnosis is almost inconsequential when it comes to treating the deficits we find. So I hope that answers your question, Sarah. And the other part of your question, excuse me, is it covered by insurance? That is the other reason you will want to seek out a clinical psychologist or a neuropsychologist, somebody that has diagnostic ability, because often that will be covered by insurance. What I suggest, Sarah, is reaching out to the provider of your choice and asking ahead of time if they take insurance. A lot of times you'll see it on their website, but make the call also. And you'll also want to reach out to your insurance to see if they require pre-authorization. So Mary, you're asking about what if the child is autistic. Many children have dual diagnoses, and that's pretty common. And so if they have a dual diagnosis, the real question, Mary, is you'll have to work with a practitioner that is very familiar with an individual who may have autism or an individual who may have dyslexia. So they can easily kind of tweeze through, this characteristic is due to this characteristic is due to that, or one diagnosis is impacting another. And that means the prognosis or the length of time it will take for recovery may be longer. So with that said, so you can definitely support individuals who have dual diagnosis or multiple comorbidities, anxiety, ADHD, auditory processing. They all run in the same circles as dyslexia, and it's very common to see multiple diagnoses. So you'll want to make sure, Mary, that you seek out a provider that's familiar with any diagnosis that you're concerned about with your child. So one of the ways you can do this, Mary, is reach out to the provider that you're considering and ask if they're familiar with these diagnoses. Me specifically, I am not. I am not a pediatric therapist. I specifically only work with children who have dyslexia. So if I have a child that comes to me and they also have a diagnosis of autism or another diagnosis, and it's impacting the dyslexia to the point where I'm not able to provide that intervention in an effective way, I will refer my client to a pediatric outpatient therapist who is an expert in that primary diagnosis, so they can work with the child and then also educate me and support me on how I can support that child with dyslexia. So it's really important to reach out to your provider to ask what their areas of expertise are. So that's a great question, Mary, and I appreciate that. Amy, you have a question. I often tell them to see their regular pediatrician who can recommend someone to them. That way they can make sure it will be someone in their network. Excellent. Yes. So that's another good point, is when you're looking for a person to do dyslexia testing, reaching out to your physician. Typically primary care physicians and pediatricians have a list of providers that they often refer to. So that's a great tip, Amy. I appreciate that. Okay, so I think that clears up our Q&A for right now. Please go ahead and feel free to continue to place questions in the chat as we go along. I'm happy to pause and answer any questions as we go. All righty. So when we think about working with individuals and supporting individuals with dyslexia, often we are very kind of narrow-minded in our scope of practice, which in a way we should be, right? Because that's our area of expertise. However, understanding that this team needs to come into play to fully support the child is important. So I am curious, who is the most important person on the team? I'd like to see you put something in the chat. I'll give you a minute to put your answer in the chat. Who is the single most important person on the team? I always am curious about the answers here. Answers are starting to come in. Look at you guys. You are on it. So we have multiple answers here. We have the child and the parent. And I would challenge you and encourage you to really view the child as the most important person on the team. And I think it's really important because the child is the one that's going to be going through the process in terms of the intervention and support. And they need to have intrinsic motivation to be part of the process. And typically children are done unto, they are just told they need to show up, or they're told they have to do something. So really making sure we meet with the child and include them in some of this process at a level that they can understand is really important. And so the child is the center of the team. Typically the parent and the caregiver is their biggest support system. And so yes, the parent's kind of the outer circle, but the child is the most important person in the team. Team also has speech therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, psychologists, teachers, clinical psychologists, other people you may not think about that is also on the team. How about the art teacher, the music teacher, the PE teacher, after school sports? And you're thinking, what? Why are they on the team? Well, think about this. Maybe your child really struggles with remembering what they're reading. Maybe they have difficulty with visual memory, or maybe they're having difficulty with auditory memory. Could the art teacher help with that? Could the music teacher help with that? So think of some non-traditional ways that you could bring all of that support in to work with your child. One of the things that therapy will do, occupational and speech therapy, is they will build neural pathways. So think about construction on a highway, and we think about turnpikes or throughways. If you're in New York, they're throughways. Think about interstates. And it's usually a road with very little stops, and you're just flying down the road, and it's a direct path versus taking roads that are in town, lots of stops, lots of turn, more traffic, it's busy, it's more clunky or cluttered, it just takes more time to get there. And so all those areas of the brain and Broca's motor and Wernicke's area that were underdeveloped in utero, your occupational and speech therapist can build those neural pathways, and they can make them stronger. It is never too late. When you think about it, the brain is the brain, regardless of the diagnosis. And if occupational and speech therapy can build neural pathways in a 65-year-old adult who has had a stroke, meaning that area of the brain no longer is functioning, but they can work around it. They can certainly do it in a child who's had dyslexia, where that part of the brain is underdeveloped. They can develop it in a different way, meaning they can process things easier, they can remember things easier, and they will still use strategies and accommodations, but maybe not as much. So it's really important to consider that therapy is a big portion of what you'll need to do to support the child. And then we also need tutoring to support the child. And when I say tutoring, I'm not talking about the after-school programs that work on reading and math. I'm talking about that person that'll sit down with your child and go over today's lesson. They will either break it down, they might give more activities to work on. They may present it in a different way, but it's really keeping up on what they are learning today in the classroom so they can keep up with the pace of what is going on. So that's what I mean by tutoring. And then strategies and accommodations are meant to support what is going on in the classroom. So I have another question for you. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the Q&A, but I want you to put in the chat the answers to this question. Are strategies a crutch? Are strategies temporary? And are they giving children an advantage? Yes or no? Just go ahead and throw that in the chat. I'll look at the Q&A while you're doing that. Okay, the child, it's a team effort. Yes. Thank you, Krista and Heather. That's exactly right. Let me take a look in the chat and see your answers to that question. Are strategies a crutch? Okay, I love this answer. No, all caps, exclamation point. They're necessary, not an advantage, not a crutch. Strategies are a tool for life. You guys have it going on. Now, if we can have everybody else at the table that doesn't see it like that, it would be awesome. You guys are definitely right. So strategies are for life. Something to keep in mind, though, the same strategies may not work all the time. And as your neural pathways are increasing and getting stronger, the amount of strategies may be less. So they can fluctuate over time. You may have a person who all their neural pathways have been rebuilt, they're doing great, and then all of a sudden they get sick. You know, they have the flu or a cold, or they're just exhausted, they're tired, or maybe something happened in their life and they're kind of melancholy. What will happen is they will start relying on those neural pathways, those accommodations even more. So I have a great example that happened to me yesterday. It was the end of the day. I was tired, and I'm trying to get the email out to all of you about the time for today and the attachments. And I'm reading it, and I'm thinking I'm getting everything right, and I send it out. And then Jennifer was like, oh, Penny, oh no, like you had the wrong time. And I thought, oh, okay. And I realized I put 11 because that's my time. I'm in Central now. And so I thought, oh, no big deal. I'll change it. And I changed it. I'm like, got it, sent it out. And then she's like, oops, it's still wrong. And I'm like, oh, you have to be kidding. And then I realized, here I am. What's going on? I'm tired. I have a lot on my plate. I'm having to process different time zones. And I looked at it multiple times and I'm like, but it does say 12. No, it did say 12:30. So that's what I mean. It was that moment where I was not at the top of my game, and I should have used a strategy. And a great strategy I could have used at that time is having somebody else come read my email to make sure it said the right thing before I push send. So that's just an example how sometimes you think you're firing all four cylinders and really you're not. So that is really important to just keep in mind and give grace. Okay. So strategies need to be very planned and thoughtful. I think one of the things we think about is, maybe I should phrase this different. We learn that I always like to use extended time because I think extended time is one of the most popular strategies I hear being used across the board. And we offer this strategy as a blanket. Just give extended time. Well, when? And why? And we're not asking those questions. We just, oh, extended time, great. We'll do it for everything. We'll do it on an exam. We'll do it for homework. We'll do it for a class activity. We'll do it in every situation. And then we're thinking, why does it work sometimes and not another? So understanding the why behind strategies and planning them are super important. And one thing to keep in mind is when you're planning strategies and accommodations, they should always speak to your client's strengths. And you'll know those client strengths because when you take a look at the evaluations that the clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist did, you'll see if they scored average or above. If they scored average and above, then that's a strength and that's what you want to play to. And if you're looking at standardized scores for average would be somewhere between the 25th and 75th percentile rank, not percentages, like an 80% is a B, a percentile rank. It's a statistical measure. So that's a note to put on your page if you're taking notes today and you're looking at an evaluation. Let's say they have their auditory memory and it is in the average score of 25th to 75th percentile rank, you know their auditory memory is average, then you're going to pull a lot of auditory strategies in. For example, they may be able to record their session. They may be able to have somebody verbally explain it to them. So you're going to play to their strengths when planning their strategies. All right, so we've already touched on this, expand on your strategies. One size does not fit all. So again, let's go back to extended time. Let's say you have a child who has really poor delayed recall. We talked about average percentile ranks being around the 25th percentile rank and higher on a score. So let's say somebody tested for delayed recall and you're reviewing the evaluation that the psychologist, clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist did, or school psychologist, and they scored in the 3rd percentile rank. So this would be a significant deficit because there's a big gap between the 3rd percentile rank and the 25th percentile rank. It's not even below average. It's a severe deficit. So they have a 3rd percentile rank in delayed recall, which should tell you right now at this moment, they don't have the ability to hold on to something for, extended time. So putting them in a situation to do that will typically yield in frustration. So for example, Sally's delayed recall is in 3rd percentile rank. Monday, she was given 13 colonies to remember for a test on Friday. Friday comes along, the class is given 20 minutes to take their test. Sally is given 30 minutes because she was given time and a half. So it's 20 minutes plus 10 minutes is 30 minutes. So she's given extra time. In the first 20 minutes, Sally remembers 9 of the colonies. The likelihood of her remembering the remaining 4 in the extra 10 minutes that she has is really slim because her capability is in the 3rd percentile rank. We know that because of her standardized testing. So putting her in a situation where you're giving her extended time, of the goodness of our heart, we think we are supporting Sally. We are doing best effort to give her all the support she needs. What Sally's thinking internally, the self-talk is, I should know it. They're giving me extra time to know it. I should know it. I'm dumb. I'm not good enough. I can't do it. And you have this negative spiral and the anxiety is just rising in her. So in that situation, don't give her extended time. If you're wanting a child to remember something for a long period of time, but you go back to the testing and it's not there, don't put them in that situation. What do you need to do? They should be seeing speech therapy or occupational therapy to work on their memory. That is definitely in their wheelhouse. And that's where therapy comes into support. And as you're reading that report from the psychologist and neuropsychologist, you'll find that at the end of those reports, they have a list of strategies and accommodations. And before you move on with that, I was always ask them, when do we use them and why do we use them and in what scenario? And they should be able to articulate that. So let's take Sally and her 3rd percentile rank for delayed recall, and let's give her a different scenario. So let's say that Sally is reading a chapter out of a book, or you're reading to her. Okay. Either way. And you ask her a question about a passage you just read. So let me rephrase that. That was a horrible example. Let me rephrase it. Okay, so Sally's reading a passage, and when she first reads it, she struggles with decoding a little bit, and she's really having to sound it out. So the words are coming out kind of robotic and broken. She reads it again, and this time it's becoming a little more fluid and more rhythmic and normal reading. She reads it a 3rd time, and this 3rd time is her first opportunity to remember what she's reading, because the other 2 times she was just sounding it out. And so she can't sound out and decode and remember at the same time. So the 3rd time is the first pass she's remembering. Do we give her extra time in that scenario to read the passage 3 times to answer the question right away? Will that work for her? Absolutely. Because that's not a delayed recall. You're asking her that question as soon as she's able to comprehend for the first time. So in that case, giving her extra time would be wonderful for her. So you can see from the 2 examples where giving extended time in one scenario would be really successful for a child, but may cause, negative self-esteem and self-concept in another. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So really understanding the purpose of the strategy in the accommodation and knowing how and when to use it is almost, if not equally, more important than the accommodation itself. Variety is key. We don't use the same accommodation in every scenario, so providing a variety of strategies and accommodations are super important, so they have a toolbox to choose from. And immediate application enhances success. So let's take a look at what that really means. When we're thinking of strategies and accommodations, especially when they come to memory, there's a few things that we can use. Rehearsal is something that we use all the time. So in the chat, I want you to list when you think children or students would use rehearsal. So rehearsal is when we repeat something over and over and over and over. What are some opportunities that you can think of that we use rehearsal all the time when we're working to enhance our memory? I'll give you just a moment to put that in the chat. Music, yes. When else do we use rehearsal? Alphabet sounds. Learning phone numbers. Rachel, I remember years ago, I remembered phone numbers, and now I don't think I could call my family if I had to in an emergency. Visuals, class routines, spelling, yes. So think of spelling, and Lori's right. Math facts, spelling, those are all rehearsal things. So absolutely. So when you think about rehearsing, you'll give an example of it, and then you'll apply it straight to what they're doing. So chunking, this is when we break something down. So when we think about chunking, think about remembering an address, 515 Carmen Avenue, Massachusetts, Sacramento, California. Okay, so you may want to chunk it. Chunk it. Here's the numbers, here's the street, here's the city, here's the state, and they just remember small chunks at a time, and then they put it together. So chunking, you teach them the concept of chunking, and then you apply it to something applicable. As soon as you teach them that strategy, chunking works really well if you're spelling really long words, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Spelling that would be a challenge, but if you break it down into 3 or 4 letter chunks, and then they remember the chunks, and when they spell the word, they just put all the chunks together without spacing, they can now spell the whole word. So chunking is a great way to break something down, or you can use categories. You can remember things by what they do, or by colors, or by tasks. Mnemonics are a great way to remember something. So, I remember using this a lot in anatomy in college, where you're learning muscles or you're learning a concept, and then you're taking the first letter of each word and you're making a silly sentence out of it, and that's helping you remember something. So mnemonics can be really tricky for a young student to learn. So you may want to come up with things that they're familiar with. Maybe ask them what maybe they like sports. So come up with baseball. I'm writing this down so I don't forget. Baseball. They love baseball and hockey. And let's think of another, football. Okay. And so now we have BHF, and we could say ball, hat, ball hat. I need one for F. Ball hat, flag. Ball hat, flag, and they'll remember that. And the ball goes to baseball, hat goes to hockey, flag goes to football, and they can remember the 3 sports. So once you come up with something that's familiar to them and they get the concept of how to use the strategy, then you're going to gravitate to things that they're familiar with so they can implement the strategy. And so those are really important things so they understand how to use it. Once they get that down, you're going to want to move into things that are unfamiliar to them, because the whole point of strategies is for them to be able to hold on to information or what they're learning. And as they go higher in their grades, they will start working on material that's further from their lived experience, which makes it more challenging for them to learn. And so understanding how to harness that at a younger age will make it easier for them when they are older. Okay. We are close to wrapping up. We've gone a lot faster than I thought. So if you have questions, we're going to open it up to Q&A here in a little bit. So go ahead and start thinking of any questions you have, and I'm happy to answer anything, whether it's on topic here or anything that you have about dyslexia. I am happy to answer them. So accommodations are a little different than strategies. Accommodations are external things that come in to support your child. And so I listed some ideas here to give you kind of a jumping point. Note takers. Could somebody in the class take notes for your child if you needed that? We get into older elementary school, middle school, and certainly high school where notes need to be taken. Or can the teacher have notes already written and handed out to the child, especially if the child has visual memory deficits? They're going to have difficulty copying from the board. Or if they have attention deficits or auditory processing issues, they're going to have a hard time sorting through all that information to pull out what they need to take notes on. Maybe provide outlines. This will be, if you're a teacher, provide outlines. This may be an opportunity to cue your child of key things to pay attention to or be alerted to. So when you hit on that topic, they know to make a note about it. Note buddies. This by far is one of my favorites because it really has peer support involved. So in the classroom, maybe you break up your area into pods of 4, where you have 4 desks put together and these students are working in pods and all the students take notes. In those pods, those students would then copy each other's notes and share each other's notes. And the lovely thing about that is all of us pull different things and feel different things are important. And so now if you have notes of 3 of your peers, you'll most likely capture all the information. So note buddies are just really great. Live scribe pen is just one of the things on the market. There's many things like it, but this is an opportunity. This is great for children who are in middle school or high school. This is an opportunity for students to push a button on their pen. It'll pick up auditory recording as they're writing. There may be some privacy rules in a public school classroom where you couldn't use this because it's recording, but homeschooling, private schools, there may be some wiggle room here. And so that's something to check out with the institution that you're with. But what I love about LiveScribe Pen is as long as the pen is writing, then it's recording. So for example, let's say in science, you're learning about photosynthesis, and there's a lot of technical terms that the instructor is going over, and it's pretty intense. The student can be drawing a flower. And what will happen is when they go home and they download the recording from their pen to the LiveScribe software on their computer, their notes will come up and that picture of that flower will come up. And then the student will point to the flower and the audio of what was going on at that time will come over the audio. If there are if there's more than one person in the classroom taking notes, the LiveScribe software can connect these individuals. And so they can share notes. Notes can be organized by key phrases. As you go on into high school and college, this becomes even more of a robust program. This is also something, if you're an adult dealing with dyslexia, it's great to use in office meetings. So it's a really handy tool. There's a variety of voice to text software out there. I know Microsoft and Google have some for free. They're wonderful. Seating is really important for accommodations. So we miss information if we're not faced toward the person we're talking to. So if the student is turned to their side and the teacher's out front, they may miss part of that. So making sure the student is able to see the whole face of the teacher or whoever's communicating the information is very helpful. Typically seating up front is very helpful, less distractions. Also think about the distractions, visual distractions in a classroom. The less that's on the walls and the less visual distractions, the easier it is for a child to focus. Extended time, we've already talked about when and when not to use extended time. Smartphones, this can be a tricky wiki, right? Because we don't want children on technology in terms of distraction, playing games. However, technology can be a friend. So if you choose smartphones or iPads or any device where a student could record or take pictures from notes on the board or things like of that nature, you also want to make sure there's a clear agreement on the norms and expectations of how that technology is used in the classroom. They cannot play on it. Just because they're allowed to use it for accommodation doesn't mean they have full reign to use it whenever they want, and that there's consequences if it's used inappropriately. And so, setting those expectations and guidelines up front would be super helpful. Okay, I'm going to hold off on the Q&A for just a second, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to switch to a different document. Hang on a second as I do this. Okay. Are you able to see my screen? What I have pulled up here are the accommodations, and I'm not sure if you can see them. Hang on, I'm not a fan of this layout. Okay. If someone can just write in the chat if they can see my screen. Yes, you can. Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Denise and Amy and Megan. I appreciate that. Okay. So all of you have this, and this is a very generic list of suggested school accommodations. I've been using it for years, but there's a few things I want to bring your attention to, and you're free to use this any way you would like. So I think what's really helpful, I know we have some clinical psychologists on with us, and this is a suggestion specifically that I have for you that might be really useful for your clients. Most school psychologists and neuropsychologists, dyslexia evaluations I have read, have a list, and it's a robust and very helpful list of accommodations at the end of their evaluation, but it leaves the user on the user end to not really have a clear understanding of in what situation to use them. So one suggestion I make when you're listing your accommodations or strategies is to categorize them so the user understands how to use them. So for example, if you're wanting to modify how something is presented of your teaching materials, I have those listed of how you would modify. And then if You have somebody that has difficulty with auditory processing or auditory memory. I have a list of accommodations that would support them in that area. Or if you have somebody that has difficulty with visual memory or visual processing, I have items listed in that area that are specific for visual needs. If you have somebody who has difficulty with hands-on activities, or you need time modified, or you want to use high tech or low tech. So I have them all broken down, and that is very helpful for parents to use or for teachers to use, because it's really difficult for teachers to have a classroom of 10, 20, 30 children, knowing that there's going to be dyslexia is 1 in 5, plus all the other children who may have an IEP or 504 or special needs. For a teacher to remember all the different accommodations and all the different strategies they need to use for all the children, this is really, really helpful if it can be broken down so teachers can just go to this one section, or parents can go to this one section and just pull those and say, oh, okay, I can work with these 5 or 6, and I can play with these a little bit and see what works best for my child. So those are really, really helpful. And so that's what I've provided this list for. And like I said, you can use it at your discretion, any way that you like, but I hope that is helpful. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Q&A. Let me first look at the chat and see if there's anything in there. Okay, so Mary, all of these documents were emailed when you registered. So if you did not get an email, because I know we had some people register 5 minutes before the event and I wasn't able to get it out, please just email me directly after this event and I'm happy to get it to you. So I am going to put my email in the chat, help@dyslexiarx.com. So if you did not get man, word finding just went out the door. If you did not get the PowerPoint handout or the strategies and accommodation handout, please email me at help@dyslexiarx. And when we are done with today's webinar, I will be happy to email that out to you. So thank you very much for asking that, Mary. Okay, so we have some questions. Are math skills affected by dyslexia? Yes, challenges in math can be a derivative of dyslexia, absolutely. And the one thing I've noticed, Rachel, from that is typically my children that I've worked with that have difficulty with math, they also have difficulty with visual memory or visual perceptual skills. So it's really important to look at those skills, because sometimes it's not the dyslexia, sometimes it's the visual perceptual or visual memory. And so it's important to have these skills assessed so you can tweeze out where the deficit lies, so you can get the proper treatment. And if it is a visual memory or a visual perceptual skill, or maybe an ocular motor where their eyes are not teaming together, that is something that should be supported by an occupational therapist and or an ophthalmologist. Great question. So Susan asks, have you seen proven results that asymmetrical physical exercises eventually help to strengthen tracts in the brain that can help overcome dyslexia eventually? Yes. So there are a variety of things, and the asymmetrical physical exercises usually leads to the fact that their primitive survival reflexes were not integrated. So this is definitely something I would reach out to have support through an occupational therapist or a physical therapist that are pediatric therapists to support you in this way. They are the experts in that and could really help with integrating those neural pathways. Great question. And the next question is, Rachel, do you have any views on MNRI therapy to help dyslexia? First of all, can you spell out that acronym for me, Rachel, to make sure I'm interpreting that correctly? And I'll come back to that answer, because I'm not quite sure where we're going with that. Susan, when I have a child that can see to read a chart of simple shapes, but has difficulty getting out what they see speech-wise, how can I work to improve upon that? Or is that more for SLP? Susan, I would definitely reach out to a speech language pathologist and ask for a screener at the least, if not an evaluation. I would take their cues for sure. Great question. Because I don't know if that's word retrieval. I'm not quite sure what the cause of that is. So a speech therapist could take a deeper dive and get more information to give you an answer that's specific for that child. Okay, and Beverly, answer copy of the accommodations. Please feel free to email me at help@dyslexiarx.com and I can get that to you. Who would do delayed recall testing? So Denise, that would be done by an occupational therapist, a speech language pathologist, a clinical psychologist, or a neuropsychologist. They can all do testing on memory in general. They can look at short-term memory. They can look at long-term memory, delayed recall, and immediate recall. They can do all of that. So those would be your professions that you'd want to seek out. Denise, who would, oh, I just answered that question. Okay. So Amy, at what age do dyslexia symptoms arise? Can a kindergartner be diagnosed? This is a great question. And well, all the questions are great, but this is a question there's a lot of literature on, and then there's a lot of anecdotal opinion on. I have seen evidence-based research that says it can be diagnosed as early as 6 months. Myself, I've not seen it, so I can't speak to that, but I thought the research article was interesting. I know typically clinical psychologists and neuropsychologists, often the rule of thumb is waiting till 9 years old. I have evaluated children for executive cognitive deficits as early as 4.5. So here's my perspective from an occupational therapist. We can work with children in early intervention, even as early as, newborns. With that being said, if there is a deficit, we will treat it. So when I evaluate somebody as young as 4.5, which I know OTs can evaluate children much younger, but that's my comfort level of where as young as I will go. Let's say I may not know if they have dyslexia or not, and it is out of my scope of practice to diagnose for dyslexia, but I do know that when you look at evidence-based research, visual perceptual skills, auditory memory, sequencing, processing skills, they all go into testing for dyslexia, and all those executive cognitive functions have to be functioning at an average level for reading to be successful. So if I'm going to see it, if I see a deficit, I'm absolutely going to treat it. It doesn't matter if they have a diagnosis of dyslexia or not. If they have a deficit in these skills that are required for learning and reading success, I will treat it. So it's never too early to treat it. If there is a deficit that you see, treat it when you see it. Why? Because the earlier you treat it and address it, the quicker that remediation will occur and the less loss of learning that will occur along the way. So great question, Amy. Amy's next question is, letter reversal is very common in elementary school, yet everyone's go-to is that maybe dyslexia. What are your thoughts on this? Absolutely. Reversals are normal in young ages. So what I do is I want to find out if there's a neurological reason why they're doing reversals. I think that's really the answer to the question. So with that being said, I will look and see if their eyes are teaming correctly. I will look to see if they have any visual perceptual deficits. So I may do testing with the Jordan left-right. I may do testing with the VMI, the visual motor integration test. I may take a look at the Berry. And so I'm going to use standardized testing to see if there's an executive cognitive function or a clinical reason why. And if there is, I'm going to treat that deficit. If there isn't, that's when I default to, this is learning, practice, remediation, and time. It may change. Let me see where I left off. That was a great question, Amy. Okay, Rachel. Okay, thank you, Rachel, for giving me your information. I don't even know if I can pronounce those words, but I do not have experience with MNRI. And so if there is somebody else that's in this webinar that has experience, whether it's anecdotal or evidence-based, if you can put in the chat what that experience is to help address Rachel's question, that would be great. She's asking if there, what my views are on MNRI therapy with dyslexia. And it's a neurosensory reflex integration, uses reflex patterns to awaken genetic sensory motor to make it faster and easier in the nervous system of self-restore the impaired functions. So I do know for a fact that the primitive reflexes, if they are not integrated, they have characteristics that look exactly like dyslexia. And from my anecdotal data gathering, typically children with dyslexia, most of the primitive reflexes that they haven't integrated would be the spinal galant reflex, which also shows challenges with reading, engaging in sports, and with memory. And so here's the thing. Dyslexia is a language processing disorder. Issues with reflexes can impact reading and make dyslexia look more severe than it is. And so what we're really talking about here could be etiology. What's the cause? We'll never know if the cause of the reading difficulty, especially when they have multiple things going on, we'll never know exactly what that cause is. However, we can easily treat primitive reflexes. They are curable to integrate. They're a much easier treatment than treating dyslexia. So when I have that question, I automatically will treat the reflexes. And then what you'll see is the characteristics, if they go away and extinguish, it wasn't due to dyslexia, it was due to the lack of integration of reflexes. If it was due to dyslexia, you wouldn't see any change. And if it was a mixture of both, you'll see a decline in the characteristics, but they'll still be hanging on because of dyslexia. So to answer your question a little indirectly, Rachel, I absolutely support treating the reflexes and doing activities to do that. There's a significant amount of research out there that supports it. This particular method I'm not familiar with personally, so I can't speak to the method, but there's a significant amount of research out there that supports these types of activities. So I hope that was helpful. And I'm going to move on to the next question. I'm just cleaning up the list so I don't get confused. What are some key signs we can look at for preschool age? Megan, yes. So preschool age, things we can think about. Even younger than that, difficulty crawling, walking at a late age, not able to, I don't want to say not able to ride a bike, but extensively longer learning how to ride a bike than normal for that age. Difficulty tying shoes, not wanting to cross midline when coloring or playing. Those are some things. When you think about learning letters, you're teaching them the letter, 5 seconds later, they can't remember the letter or the letter sound. Every day is a new day and that type of thing. Those are some great things to keep an eye out for with children that are in preschool age. Amy, you are welcome. All right, kiddo, does dyslexia impact reading and writing exclusively? Can it impact social interaction and expressive language abilities? Absolutely. So dyslexia has a whole social side to it in language because people with dyslexia, they think in movies and images and not words. So their brain is firing at a much more rapid pace. So they have difficulty getting information out because the brain's going faster than what they can verbally express. And they typically have difficulty interpreting body language, reading the room, and may misinterpret what's going on in a social situation. And because of that, they have difficulty with social interaction. So working through scenarios, I remember a scenario when my daughter was in elementary school. She came home one day really sad because she thought one of her friends didn't want to be her friend anymore. And so I was unpacking that and I asked her why. And she said, when we went to lunch, her friend had gotten there before her and was already seated at a table with other children. So my daughter went through the line. There wasn't room for her. So she automatically assumed that little girl didn't want to be friends with her anymore. And I said, well, did you ask her? No. Did you ask if you could sit with her? No. So there was just this disconnect and interpretation of the situation, or being able to manage more than one friendship at a time is often hard for individuals with dyslexia. Jessica, this is the last question that we have in the Q&A. So if you have more questions, go ahead and add them in here. Jessica asks, who is responsible for the dyslexic child, the classroom teacher or resource teacher? Ooh, great question. I'm going to put that out to you for just a minute. I'd love to see in the chat your answer to this. Before I chime in, who is responsible for the dyslexic child, the classroom teacher or resource teacher? What say you, attendees? Parents, both? Any other thoughts? They need to work together, both? Both? I think there's more answers out there. What are the other answers? We have a lot of people that are saying both, they need to work together. The child needs to be responsible. Keep going, dig deeper. You guys are on a roll. I want to see if you can read my mind. What do you think I'm going to say? Principal Amy, ding, ding, ding. Amy, you get the prize. Amy and Mary, yes, that is the answer. So the answer to your question, Jessica, is the team. It is no one discipline's responsibility, nor can one discipline successfully get a child from struggling to independence. If there is one discipline that says, I can treat your child with dyslexia and they'll be fine, I would be really weary. So you go to these after school programs and these reading tutors that say, I got it covered, I can do it. Because what about the psychosocial part? What about the memory part? What about the visual perceptual part? We are each trained and experts in our field. And for example, I work with individuals with dyslexia, and I have for, I don't know, 12 years or something. I'm not a reading specialist. So I have reading specialists that were on staff with me. I'm not a speech language pathologist. I can't do language. So I had a speech language pathologist on staff with me. At the time, I wasn't addressing real in-depth mental health issues. So we referred out to a play therapist. We referred out to a cognitive therapist. If you don't have the expertise, you can't band-aid it together. We all need to come around and support the child, the parent, the family. It takes a team. And I'm so glad that that question was asked and that all of you kind of worked through that. It definitely takes a team. Not one discipline should take on the responsibility, nor can they, and do it successfully. It definitely takes a team. So thank you so much, Jessica, for asking that really important question. Okay, those are all the Q&As that I have. There are no more Q&As. So I will stay on for a few more minutes. We have more time if there's any questions, but if those of you that, want to be sensitive to time, if you have patients you need to get back to or back to the classroom, you are welcome to log off. If you have any questions for me, I'll stay on to answer. Also, I am happy to reach out to your school at any time and do a free seminar just like this one. I think working with schools, you guys have schools have limited resources, and I'm always happy to be a support in any way I can. All of you that are sending me thank yous, thank you for being an advocate for your students or your patients and providing them support and continuing to invest in your own education so you can be present for them. I see another Q&A. So Jennifer, can you walk us through what it looks like when somebody comes to you for services? I know it is individualized, but what is the general process? Yes, let me share my screen and I'll walk you through that. It's a great question. Will I be able to get a copy of this webinar? It was excellent and I would like to share it with my coworkers. You can go on my YouTube channel and let me pull that up real quick. Let me stop sharing the screen for a minute and let me pull up my YouTube channel and I'll share that because that's where I'm going to post it. I have way too many screens open, so give me just a second. Get that over here. I have to get my password because I can never remember it. So be patient with me as I pull this up. Almost there. You're being very patient and I'm very appreciative. Okay, I'm going to put my YouTube channel in the chat. And so this is something that you can use to access today's webinar. There's several other webinars in there that you have access to. The other thing, if you join our Dyslexia RX community, you can have access to all of our webinars, only if you are on the YouTube channel. So let me go to the next thing I want to show you. Okay, let me see if I can share screen again. Share screen. Here we go. Now, I do want to say a disclaimer, and that is, as the prior owner of Dyslexia Center of Tulsa, due to the agreement of the sale of the company, I am not able to service any resident in the state of Oklahoma for the next 4 years. That was part of the agreement of the sale. So if you are from Oklahoma, I cannot provide services to the child, and I have to refer you to Dyslexia Center of Tulsa. So with that said, if you are outside of Oklahoma, I can certainly service you. So the way things work through me, if you want to, if a child comes to me, we have a variety of services for families that they can choose from, because everyone's just on a different page. If you're wanting ongoing support and community, like I said, you can join the Dyslexia RX community. It's a private Facebook group. I put posts up there. All of our community partners are on there, experts in writing or complimentary services. All of my webinars are also up there. I'm taking the summer off, but I usually do 3 webinars a month, and you'll have free access to those webinars and all the prior webinars for the $14 a month membership. So that is Dyslexia RX community. The other service I have is Hope for Dyslexia. Dr. Monica and I got together. She is a clinical psychologist in California, and she was looking for some type of consultation service that once she finished the evaluations with her clients, they could come to me and we could go do an in-depth review going over how to use the accommodations and how to set up a plan for school. And I curate services for them in their area to support them, whether it's OT, speech, a psychologist, mental health. I will curate that for them, provide them all their resources. And that's a 1 hour consultation that I do for families. So that's one option to kind of get families, bridge that gap from here's my clinical psychologist evaluation. Now, where do I go from here, instead of just guessing? And then I have a variety of packages. So again, I'm all about being very transparent, and I put all our prices up front because I think parents need to know that. These are pretty robust packages. So all the packages come with an in-depth screener. And when I say an in-depth screener, I provide a standardized test for short-term memory, working memory, long-term memory, and delayed recall. I provide a test for visual perceptual skills and tracking, and I provide the sensory profile measure. So we're looking at sensory integration, and based on those, depending upon the package and what the parent needs, we can provide accommodations. And then I can also provide consulting with them on how to prepare for an IEP and all the tools they would need to take this information to support them developing an IEP for school. And I'll also meet with the school and help them with that. So that's the first package. Another package is you do the same screener, and then I would meet with the family, I think for 3 45-minute sessions, and I will go over all the tools that they would need to provide support where the child can increase the neural pathways, whether it's memory, visual perceptual skills, and they can do that at home. And I work with the parent, the family, and the child, and we all work together for those 3 sessions so the child and the family can be independent once we're done with that. Another package is, of course, the screener and the Success Start program. And then we also do health and wellness coaching. This addresses nutrition, physical activity, and mental health and mental wellness, because we know that living with dyslexia is not just about reading. This also helps bring the family in so the family can best communicate and support the child. And this is a very family-centered package. And then we have the package where every single activity I do is offered in the package. So when you go to the homepage, I guess I went through this backwards. This is the process. The first thing we do is a screener, identify strengths and opportunities. Then we take a look at maybe what you can do at home, any accommodations or collaboration with school. And then we look into overall wellness and ongoing support through the community. So that's the short, long version of it all. Okay. I also do speaking and consulting and all of those things. So let's go ahead and take a look. We've got more Q&A. So let me open that up for you. Okay, Jennifer, I hope that answered your question. Thank you for asking. Sarah, speaking of the confidence of a child, how can we support our younger elementary age kiddos to read the passage 3 times in order to understand what they read? It gets frustrating to read it so many times. One great way to start doing that is choral reading. You read it first, And this is where you'll need to either have two copies of the same material or you're sitting side by side. So you read it first so they can hear the cadence, now it should work. And then you read it together. They read it with you and then they read it on their own. That might be a good way to do it. And what I would do is the other thing is you can record their first run through it and their third or fourth run to it and then play it back so they can hear the difference. And that's always very helpful for them too. And it increases their awareness of, oh, I get it. So that might be helpful. Okay, can you explain why a child is angry or refuses to cooperate in school during any class that requires reading or written work? Does it also clarify that this same child is happy, creative, and eager everywhere else? Oh my gosh, you just hit the nail on the head. When we are asked to do things that are hard for us or that are a struggle, our human nature is to avoid them and push back. But when you have a child who's getting angry or their behavior is inappropriate, what's really happening inside is they are weighing the pros and cons. What will it do to me to do what they are asked? And what will happen if I push back? And in their mind, the consequence of pushing back is less painful to them than following through on what you asked. If they've gotten to that point, that's when you need to really say, whoa, just don't even ask it, back up the truck. And when they have calmed down, they're in a good place, that's when you need to ask, how does it make you feel when I ask you to do that? Is this something that's hard? Can you describe what it's like when you do that? It is so infinitely hard for them that they will avoid it at all costs, regardless of physical harm, punishment, consequences. They'd rather take that than do what they're engaging in. And that is sad when it has gotten to that extreme. So that is when discipline has no place in that. That's when the child needs to be guided and supported of how to express their feelings. So instead of acting out, they need to be empowered to explain, I'm struggling here. Can you break it down? Can you make it easier? This is overwhelming. They need to have words to express how they're feeling. They may not have the words. They also need to be given coping strategies. I am so frustrated. I need a 5-minute break. If not, I'm going to explode. They need to know what the alternative is to exploding and being angry. And those skills need to be taught. And so that's definitely what's happening in those scenarios. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Julie, my school teaches a dual curriculum with a language that is written from left to right. So we see a lot of letter reversals in kindergarten. Oftentimes we don't see letter reversals as evidence of needing support. Do you think those tests mentioned will be helpful? Yes. So Julie, if you're seeing letter reversals, I would reach out to the occupational therapist, ask if they're under 9 years old, and I'll tell you why. If they're under 9 years old, I think the Jordan left to right is super valid, and I am all for it because it's really almost a visual perceptual test where they're identifying it if a letter is reversed. If they're 9 and older, there's a reading component to that test where they have to identify if a letter is reversed. And I've seen children who have difficulty with phonics or reading do really poorly on that part. And then as a clinician, I can't really be confident that their low score is due to reversal issues. Is it due to inability to read? So that's where it gets muddy. So I really recommend the Jordan left right for somebody that's under 9 years old. But the test for visual perceptual skills, the reason I recommend that is the visual perceptual skill test is it breaks down all the different visual perceptual skills such as visual memory, form closure, spatial awareness. It just breaks it down so you know exactly which visual perceptual skill may be the deficit and you can really hone in on treatment. So I think they would be very helpful. And that's something you'll reach out to your occupational therapist for support. Any way to address dyscalculia, or is this a totally separate thing? So I only address dyslexia. That is my wheelhouse. Dyscalculia is more of a math issue. And so what I always recommend with kiddos that have math issues is, again, look at oculomotor and teaming. So an developmental optometrist might be great for this, or an occupational therapist. Visual perceptual, visual motor skills, I would look at those as well as visual memory. And if they're coming up fine in all of those, it's probably not a cognitive issue and it may be remediation. But if they are coming up in those, at least you have some executive cognitive functions that you can work off of. But like I said, dyscalculia is not really my area of expertise, and that's my limited, what I can recommend for that. That's my limit. Okay, so Susan, also, do you have any good resources for word retrievals or short-term memory, or even some good visual worksheets? Yes, I recommend the Help series by, I think it's Super Duper. No, Linguistics, I think, publishes them. Also, Here Builder, that's by Super Duper. Here Builder has a license that you can use. I love it for memory and for phonics. That's a great one. And visual perceptual skills. There are some visual perceptual workbooks out there. You can look at what therapy at Therosaurus. Hang on, let me do some typing here. Let me see. Academic therapy, TheraPro, that's what it is. Oh my gosh, TheraPro, TheroPro. TheraPro, hang on, let me type it in. Yes, here we go. Let me put this in the chat. Visual worksheets. So TheraPro will have a lot of visual activities you can work on. And let me look at, let me pull up another resource for you. Let me do another Google search real quick. Help series. This comes up. TheraPro, you can also find the help books. They're on TheraPro as well. Great question. Okay. And the other one. Let me put this in the chat. Okay. So Here Builder is great for auditory memory and sequential memory and phonics. It goes up to 4th grade, but if you have a 5th or 6th grader that is functioning at that level, they may do it. What I found using this program is middle schoolers don't want to use this program because they feel that it's too babyish. Your elementary school kids and sometimes high school kids like this program. So, you know, be mindful of what's age appropriate for the child that you're working with. Okay. If dyslexia is understood to be due to language areas of the brain, how do you explain all the visual, perceptual, and directional issues that affect them as well? Oh, I always love this question. So if you use the dyslexia font or color overlays or Earlens lenses and it cures their dyslexia, they never had dyslexia. They had an oculomotor or visual perceptual deficit. So I wear glasses. If I take my glasses off and I try to read, I'm going to fail that reading test. If I took a dyslexia test right now, I would score poorly and look like I had dyslexia and I would be diagnosed with dyslexia. Do I have dyslexia? In real life, I do. But let's pretend I don't. It's because I have low vision, difficulty with vision. You put on my glasses and now I'm fine. Sort of, I still have dyslexia. My point being is you can have more than one thing going on. So if you take a look at all the evidence-based research behind a lot of the very popular phonic programs out there to support dyslexia, you will see that they all looked at visual perceptual skills, visual motor, auditory memory. They did not address them in their programs because it's the education field that looked into those programs. So they developed programs specific to education and reading skills. So I always test all my clients for all these executive cognitive functions because I don't know if it's really dyslexia or not, nor does it make a difference to me. But there are a big chunk of kids that come to me with a diagnosis of dyslexia, And all I do is treat their executive cognitive function, and now they're fine. Did they have dyslexia? Probably not, but because these executive cognitive areas were never addressed, they appear to have dyslexia. So they can have dyslexia and executive cognitive function. And so once you get that executive cognitive function up to that level it needs to be, then there's a smaller gap with their dyslexia. So that's how that kind of ties together. I hope that was helpful. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of where we are today. And I just want to say how much I've appreciated all of you joining in today and asking these great questions. I think we had a great conversation. Again, if there's anything I can ever do for you, you want me to speak for your, with your school, your PTA group, your homeschool group, I'm available to do that at no cost to you. I just want to be able to share information and be support where I can. And if you have any other questions about anything that happened today or we discussed, feel free to email me at help@dyslexiarx.com. Have a great afternoon. It was a pleasure.